Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drum McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at thechangeleader.com. Changing Higher Ed is sponsored by Blackbaud, the world's leading cloud software company powering social good. With their cloud solution for higher education, Blackbaud connects thousands of campuses worldwide. Visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn how they can help your institution deliver a better experience. And now, here's your host, Drum McNaughton.
Our guest today is Bill Conley, Vice President of Enrollment Management at Bucknell University. Bill's had a long and illustrious career in higher education enrollment and admissions at some of the top institutions in the U.S., institutions that include Johns Hopkins, Case Western Reserve, Drew College, and Lafayette College. These experiences have given him the expertise and perspectives on what higher ed institutions need to do to grow enrollment. Bill is also the author of The Great Enrollment Crash, an insightful piece featured in the Chronicle Review on the upcoming enrollment crisis. And by the way, it's already here. He's here to talk with us today about the enrollment cliff that is headed our way and what university presidents can do to remain viable and even thrive in the upcoming challenging times. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Drum. Happy to be here.
Well, I have been looking forward to this so much. You are an enrollment expert. You're the VP of enrollment there at Bucknell. And you just came out with a great article in the Chronicle called The Great Enrollment Crash, what many folks are referring to as the cliff. In that article, you write, higher education has fully entered a new structural reality. You'd be naive to believe that most colleges will be able to ride out this unexpected wave as we previously have. How did we get here?
Well, Drum, in context, I started admissions work in 1980, so now 40 years later, and that was part of the baseline for that article. In short, what we've had over the decades is we've had periodic drops in high school graduation rate. We've had, lingering recessions. We've had certain economic and demographic impacts that were periodic but not sustained. And colleges were always able to do something pretty much with one or two levers to adapt and adjust. But I think the seminal moment for higher education came in 2008, 2009, when the Great Recession hit. And not just from colleges that lost as much as 50% of their endowments in a period of 2 years, but families not only lost jobs and income, but they also took huge hits in wealth, often, in the area of home equity. So what we had was this kind of key turning point, and what many predicted to be a decline in high school graduation level by 2030 was of the sort that seemed periodic. But then the birth dearth, particularly in the Midwest and the Northeast, where fertility rate dropped, Nathan Grau's book, Demographics and the Demand for Higher Education, what really has precipitated what I believe is the structural reality is we can't birth kids at 17 years old. So what was going to be a rough decline is looking like a true trough. So in the Northeast, Midwest, we're looking at as many as 20% fewer high school graduates.
Wow.
In 2030. And those growth areas in the Southeast and Southwest will not be sufficient to replace that loss in the largest population density. And those students are more likely to be first generation, lower income. And I always remind people, even today, college students, by and large, attend college within 100 miles of home. So I think that's where I see this sustained reality that the demographics are not in our favor, particularly schools in the Midwest and the Northeast, and the cost of higher education is increasingly out of reach of most families.
Well, that's a great explanation of how we got here. What I'm hearing based on this is we're really entering a mature or declining market, and we're seeing that from the perspective of far more competition out there for a decreasing pool of students. We're seeing moves to post-traditional students, those that are looking to go back to finish their degrees, or they want a new degree or something for a new job or whatever along those lines. And we'll get to that. But the competition and the cost, one would think that with that, one of the things people would want to do is decrease tuition, but we're not seeing that. We're seeing tuition continuing to go up.
Well, it's interesting. There have been, there's a phrase that is called tuition resets. And there are a number of colleges over the last 10 years who did a tuition reset. And essentially what they were doing is to the consumer, it looked like they had reduced their prices by their tuition by as much as 35% or 50%. At the same time, their model said, we will reduce the price for all students, but we will also pull out financial aid because, we're using financial aid. Full pay or better pay students are paying at this high price. We take X percentage of that and repurpose it for discounting for those who can't afford it. So the idea is, well, if we're just $35,000 and we basically eliminate a lot of our responsibility for financial aid. Now, very few, if any of those, have worked in a sustained basis. Why? I believe, one, we still have what some people call the Chivas Regal effect, that if you charge less than your neighboring institution, you're worth less. You're not as good. The other thing, and this goes into consumer behaviors, is everybody wants to feel like they're getting a deal. And in college, the parents want to be able to say proudly, my daughter got a scholarship from. I was able to talk them down to this. And I like to remind people, price resetting didn't work. Just like J.C. Penney and Saturn are both out of business, and they had that no haggle pricing, right? Mm-hmm. The price we have on that car is the best price you're ever going to get. Well, people want to get a bargain. So I think we're higher education, as you describe, is in a mature, declining market. And I fear that we are being viewed increasingly as a commodity.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's one of the characteristics of mature and declining markets is the discounts. That's what brings people in. How many people listening shop on Amazon? I certainly do. And, frankly, it's great because I don't have to go out to get anything. I just one click and it's done.
Right.
But typically Amazon's prices are cheaper than everybody else's. And so that's another compelling reason to shop there.
Right.
And the J.C. Penney model is absolutely right. People want that discount. I mean, I'm really concerned because I think the fallout is going to be massive. Right now, we've had nearly 1,300 colleges and campuses closed or merged since 2014, including nearly 200 privates and publics. And just last week, we heard Concordia University up in Oregon will be closing its doors. They had 5,000 students.
Right.
And I mean, that's huge numbers. Um,
Well, on the discount front, Drum is what's, first of all, in terms of the, sticker price of higher education since 2000, the average public institution has increased by 60% in that period of time. And at private institutions, the increase has been about 45%. Meanwhile, the discount rate expressed by how many pennies on the tuition dollar are put back into financial aid in roughly about in 2007, about 38 cents nationally on the dollar of tuition was repurposed for financial aid. It's now over 50%.
wow.
So some of the schools that are in this closure merger, they are north of 70%.
Hmm.
And that is an unsustainable model in as much as that means you have 30 cents on the dollar that you can continue to invest or frankly cover your costs as an institution. So I think that's kind of one of those warning signals that at 60, 70%, you're running out of time to enroll students at a price point that you can sustain a thriving university.
I fully agree. It's crazy to me. And when I hear those numbers, 60%, 40%, the 40% I say, yeah, makes perfect sense. That's inflation rates since then. But the 60% for the publics, I have to look back to all the quote tax cuts and the reduced spending of the states for higher education. That has to factor into it. It's not that the costs have gone down, it's that you're not getting money from the state and hence your fees have gone up.
Right. In fact, I was on a panel at Rutgers University last Thursday, and the panel name, the title was Restoring Trust in Higher Education. And my counterpart at Rutgers cited not that long ago, let's say 2005, 81% of their budget came from the state. It's now 16%
Wow.
as a state subsidy. So that difference is recovered in tuition. And so that's why you have public universities, even the flagships, increasingly going across the border to recruit and enroll higher paying out of staters and potentially reducing the spaces available for in-state residents. But when they have a burden of picking up that difference between an 80% subsidy and a 16% subsidy, that's why they've grown, to your point, at a much higher rate.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's interesting about the panel, and I think it makes perfect sense. A lot of it has to do with the politics of where we are right now. A lot of it has to do with the cuts to education. We can dwell on all the problems for a full hour easily. I'm wondering, let's swap horses here, swap directions. Let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing universities doing to combat this type of thing, because I would hate to see Chris Christensen's prediction of 50% universities being out of business in the next 10 years. But from what we've been saying, it's going to be much higher. It's going to be 75. No, I'm just kidding there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my graduate degree is from Harvard, so I'm very familiar with him, and of course he passed away not too long ago. And some people feel his predictions are apocalyptic, but they're looking a little more realistic. I think one of the, something I haven't mentioned, but I think you alluded to, is just the public perception, the public opinion of higher education. I like to remind people that, frankly, all institutions today seem to be struggling with a trust factor, whether it's corporations, government, religious organizations, healthcare, higher ed. So we're all kind of under this pressure of a low opinion of the work we're doing. But certainly Varsity Blues and the scandal there, where some people said, yep, I told you, it's access to higher education is the benefit of the wealthy. We have, more and more conversations about ROI. What's the return on my investment? Will my child be career ready? What's going on with campus politics? So how are we going to move out from this is in a way to address some of these fundamentals. I do think that for liberal arts colleges, being career ready, job ready, not just for the first job, but for the next 10 a student will have or graduate will have, may require a significant reimagining of the curriculum. Tulsa University not that long ago announced basically they were closing down significant number of majors in the arts and humanities, shifting more towards STEM. You mentioned the post-traditional learner. Some schools may have to look and say, in our catchment within 100 miles, there are just not going to be enough 18 to 22-year-olds. So how do we, realign our offerings with where the demand will be? I think many institutions have a mission statement that was done when they were founded and maybe tweaked a little bit here and there, but often with empty language, just that sounded good. I think, a rigorous review and assessment of the mission and, is this mission articulated in a compelling manner so we're no longer a commodity? We're looked at as a distinctive, differentiated place. So when I, in my article, talked about, looking at money, majors, and mission, and did the nautical analogy of those are three different sails that one has to pull and push and prod in different ways to catch, this headwind to be able to move forward.
And that makes perfect sense. Money, mission, and
majors.
Majors, thank you. Yeah, sometimes I suffer from this disease called CRS, which stands for can't remember squat. And so one college I know just recently, in fact, one of our recent guests, president of Hiram College, Lori Varlata, did an academic prioritization. And I see that's critical. Mission is one of those things that, oh my gosh, if we get into changing the mission, that means we have to do a sub-change with our accreditor, and nobody wants that kind of thing. I think it's going to be necessary. On a fundamental level, I think we need to, when I say we, those of us in higher education need to take a deep look at how we perceive ourselves.
Right.
In the past, that liberal arts education has been good, and you'll see multiple surveys out there saying those people do better in business than they in fact. So we need to look at it from a different perspective. Instead of it going back for a liberal arts education or an education, we need to look at it as a part of the career supply chain or the skills supply chain. And going through that, it's like, what are the skills that students need not only to get that first job, but also to be successful in life?
Right.
And so it could be, longer, nobody wants to have students go back to school for longer periods, but it could be, micro credentials, stackable certificates along these lines.
Boot camps,
exactly. And have things to where students can go back, they can get the credits for the degree that they need, because we all know that degree is the key to open the door.
Right. Well, and I think some people think especially in the small liberal arts colleges with low endowments, and they're legion in the Midwest and in the Northeast. And if people looked at a map of where colleges and universities are in this country, sometimes you can't even see the Hudson River because of the conflated bubbles of colleges. So what happens is there are some people who misinterpret my view or my sense of mission has to be adapted as saying we need to throw out the liberal arts. And I don't say that at all. I'm a product, as are my 10 brothers and sisters, of liberal arts education. What I explain people, how I explain it is that you mentioned skills, and on the other, if in this bifurcation, there's skills, and on the other side, this idea of soft skills, ability to write, ability to think critically. And that seemed always to be the province of liberal arts. And what I see as kind of the emerging model is blending into the idea of competencies, emotional quotient, which is, a liberal arts benefit of how do you build character, things like empathy and persistence and those sorts of things. And they can continue to be developed in a liberal arts environment, but also in a pre-professional one. I saw a Google graph showing how over the last 10 years has the Google Drive taken liberal arts colleges, and it is an incredibly sharply declining number of searches on that phrase. And people say, see, it's in decline. I said, no, actually, it's because that language is old and a lot of people don't use it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that liberal arts isn't valuable. It's more and more families are saying, I know the importance of those soft skills or those competencies, but they're not simply the purview of liberal arts. We can get them in other ways. So I think we just simply need to imagine how the liberal arts, like English and history and political science, are still relevant and job-ready preparation.
I agree completely. It's important that the kids have these skills, but the day of having so many history majors or so many English majors, I think that is gone by the wayside. Yes, there still is need for those to be able to teach those skills, as well as people in public relations and things like that. Those are critical skills to have. But to be able to focus students more on a career. Now, that also makes it challenging because students coming into your traditional students, they don't really know what they want to do.
Sure.
The post-trads do. So as well as one of the things you said earlier with first-gen students, they require much more, for lack of a better word, hand-holding going through the program until they have developed the study skills, the emotional intelligence, the critical thinking necessary to be successful in higher ed. And that makes the model for higher ed changing. For instance, I don't know what Bucknell's doing, but I know one university in California, Cal State San Marcos, 50% of their graduation rate is first-gen students.
Right.
And they've added quite a number of counselors, advisors, folks to help these first-gen students through the whole process. What's Bucknell done with that?
Well, I think first gen tends to be the group that people say, oh, we've got to, literally reinvent our support structures. I don't believe that. I do understand that a first gen, why is that an important characteristic? It's because their parents did not experience a college environment, whether it's as a commuter student or, a 4-year residential college. And there's a certain code and culture, social capital, right, that goes with that. I don't think it's that complicated. We do have at Bucknell, we have a very powerful student success artificial intelligence model that we admit students who, based on their preparation, and we have a 30% admit rate, so we're not, taking many, if any, risks, but we know there's differentiated likelihood of success, not just in first gen, but for other students. So we have a way of measuring when does a student begin to show evidence that they're struggling academically, socially. A key piece is at the fourth week of class, we have what we call an alert, early alert system. And they don't have to have a graded assignment. We ask each of the faculty, our students take 4 courses a semester, to give a red, yellow, or green signal. And it's really just their observation of a student's behavior. Are they coming to class? Do they seem alert? Are they engaged? And we can consolidate those reports and look at it and say, wow, here's a student who, based on some really important criteria, we're more likely to struggle than this student. And here they are with 2 reds, a yellow, and a green. Let's get in there and talk to them. Whereas the same student with that kind of index of concern could have 4 greens. And they're knocking the ball out of the park. Not that we should forget about them, but that, I think, is the key. And it could be any descriptor: first gen, underrepresented student, an athlete, a legacy, an engineer. So I go at this as we're not looking at a monolithic population. We have to be attended to each and every student. And I think we're doing it well. And actually, there's places like Georgia State University and Arizona State at a much larger footprint who are doing similarly good work in identifying students that are in need of assistance.
Yeah, Drexel, just down the road from you guys, they're also doing a great job with it. So I'm going to take a liberty here and add an additional M to your money, mission, and majors. I think metrics is the other piece with that.
Sure. I mean, I always say you can't change what you don't measure, and what you measure, and I'll add the 5th M, is what matters. So we are, as I said, we are looking at these metrics not as Big Brother is watching, but we believe that our families, give to us at Bucknell their most cherished possession, so to speak, their children.
Yes.
And we have an obligation to, we work hard to select that 30% that we think will, succeed at Bucknell. Meanwhile, the students, when they choose Bucknell, they're saying, that's where I believe I can succeed. So that's a really important moral obligation to make that partnership work. It's also an economic imperative that, we're lucky. We 95% of our first year students come back for their second year. 90% of our entering cohort will graduate from Bucknell within 6 years. I think for most institutions, those are, aspirational numbers. And I think in this new reality, not just recruiting, but keeping students is going to be the singular focus. And I think that's where institutions, when I say, so what are the things to do? One of them is to double down on your student success commitment.
Well, thank you. And that takes us right up to our last couple of questions is, what are the 3 takeaways that you would give university presidents on how to turn around this situation in their particular instance?
I would think first and foremost, I'm glad you said three because there is no silver bullet. I don't think any institution, particularly one that is located more than 100 miles from those growth areas, can recruit themselves only out of this. That single effort of putting more boots in the ground, sending more mail and email, that's not going to be sufficient. So I think they have to attend, number one, to making sure their recruitment efforts are measured and effective. Number two, their retention efforts are at state of the art. And I don't believe it always means they have to invest more. In some cases, they just have to leverage technology and reimagine priorities among the staff they already have. And then the third thing is to really look at the curriculum and its long-term relevancy for this smaller traditional student body that's going to be coming to college over the next 20 to 30 years. So again, as I mentioned in my article, I think they have to pull on 2, 3, 4 ropes simultaneously, rather than I think the old effort was, let's just look for that silver bullet and focus there. That will be insufficient.
Those are great things that folks need to be doing. And it's not could do, it's some things that they have to do.
Correct.
And so Bill, what's next for you, Bucknell? What do you see your future? More sailing?
Yeah, actually, I'm not a sailor. The best I did was a sailfish, on Barnegat Bay in New Jersey. Well, I certainly think, number one, Bucknell is, in a very enviable position with a 30% admit rate, nationally recognized programs in, arts and science, engineering and management, a strong alumni body. So I feel retiring now, as I will at the end of June, Bucknell is in a really strong position and already doing things that I've suggested earlier. For me, I'll go into some consulting work in this space of enrollment management, frankly, helping new presidents especially who want to be really given a primer on these realities, be available to their deans and VPs in admissions to help them cope with what is really going to be increasingly real-time, realities that require some, dynamic decision-making. I think the days of spending months assessing and then years planning are over. So I hope that my partner and I can give some real value to institutions through their human resources there to make the most of it.
Well, we wish you all the best of luck in that. And thanks again for being on the show. I mean, this has just been a fascinating conversation for me, and I hope it's of benefit to our listeners. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Drum, and I'll look forward maybe another opportunity down the road.
That sounds like a great idea. We will do that.
All right. Take care.
You too. Thanks for listening this week, and a special thank you to this week's special guest, Bill Conley, Vice President of Enrollment Management at Bucknell, and for his sharing with us some great ideas on how to survive the impending enrollment cliff. I also want to give a special shout out to our sponsor, Blackbaud. Visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn about their cloud fundraising, accounting, education management, scholarship, and analytic solutions that are powering some of higher ed's top institutions. Our next guest is Dr. Scott Cowan, President Emeritus of Tulane University, where he served as its 14th president for 16 years. Scott's name is synonymous with leadership during crises. He shepherded New Orleans' recovery effort after Hurricane Katrina. There's a lot of parallels between what went on back then and what's going on now with the coronavirus, and Scott will be joining us to give us his perspective on how university presidents can cope and actually thrive through this time.
This episode of Changing Higher Ed was brought to you by Blackbaud, the world's leading cloud software company powering social good. Be sure to visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn how they can help your institution deliver a better experience from admissions to advancement. Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drum McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.